6:30 is the time. That's the time. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Naledi Mulo. We continue with news at Prime. Now back to one of our top stories of the day, where the ANC's top brass are in Cape Town ahead of the party's 113th anniversary and annual January 8th statement. It's going to be taking place on the 11th of this month. The party says the decision to host this year's celebrations in Cape Town is informed by the need to strengthen and renew its structures in the province. Now, to discuss this and other political events and leaders' hopes for the year, I'm joined by Dr Ongama Mtimka, a political analyst from Nelson Mandela University. Dr. Mtimka, a happy new year to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Blessed 2025 to you and your viewers. Naledi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. A great time as well to start the year, I suppose, by really reflecting on what is coming for many of our political parties as we kickstart the year. And a lot of the focus, of course, being on the ANC, looking at Khayelitsha to host their 113th anniversary celebration. I mean, what do you make of that? They say an opportunity for them to try and grab their voters back in the Western Cape.
So last year, we were starting the year with the hashtag 2024 is our 1994. That compelled parties to be a lot more outwardly looking as far as how to present a compelling proposition to South Africans. And a lot of time was spent with that outward focus. This year, I did think that there's going to be a lot of internal organization building work that is needed, both in terms of the new kids on the block, but also some of the older parties. With the ANC and the Democratic Alliance in particular, I think the big question is, how do they cement themselves as new partners in a government of national unity? What posture do they take internally? How do they resist some elements that resist the current arrangements at government level? And to what extent will the arrangements at government level influence what nature of a party develops from this year going into 2024. And I think a big issue of that, we're going to see that play out, Naledi, in the conferences that are being hosted. Late last year, we saw some from the Youth League, for example, some Youth League structures. Throughout the year, we're going to be seeing provinces, regions, and provinces having elections. And I think that these dynamics of being a party that's in coalition with others in government is going to be a factor in that.
It's very interesting that you talk about political parties needing to, I suppose, look internally in 2025, when in fact next year we go into the local government elections, and so immediately they need to then start going outward again. But if we just, let's perhaps go through some of them individually and the sort of internal work that they need to do then in 2025. And I'll go back to the ANC. It's interesting that they'd go to the Western Cape, right? They lost that province back in 2009. When you say they need to work on their internal structures as a party, is starting the year in the Western Cape a good place to go? Or are there particular other parts of the countries where perhaps they have a bigger sort of, constituency that could give them more of an ear?
There are two things to explain the ANC's venture into the Western Cape and how it is saying what it's saying about it. One, I think it's fatigue about the stadium filling up, politics. That's one. And then the second thing, I think their official line that they are rebuilding in a province that needs it the most. So I think that both of those are true at the same time. That I think they, for a change, they want to host an event where whether or not they're going to fill a stadium doesn't reflect badly on the current leadership, lest that gets used internally to start some or to strengthen internal anti-ruling group, lobbying. That's one. Yes, indeed, when it comes to the Western Cape, the ANC does need to regain lost ground there. But yes, events are crucial with these because they profile the province. The province has to mobilize across the different regions within the province to make sure that they present a good showing. We also get to see a lot more attention getting paid to structures within that province. So yes, I think that's likely, to happen. But how sustainable it's going to be and how it's going to contribute to the growth of the ANC in the Western Cape is going to take a lot more than that. Internally, the organization is weak, has been weak for some time, with its internal structures only geared towards candidates running against each other, leading to an election, not building an organization that's an effective opposition so that it can be an effective opposition per se. This has been the biggest problem with the ANC, that every attempt made to try and build the organization, whether it be at branch level or regions, there is always elite competition about who is emerging in those branches and who that person or that grouping is aligned with in provincial politics, first regional politics, provincial politics, and national politics. And national politics are really conferences as opposed to party policy and strategy
Yeah.
tactics.
Yeah, it's interesting because if we start to then step away and you talk about, needing to, I suppose, strengthen the structures within the African National Congress, I then want to look at other political parties. Not a good year, 2024, perhaps for the African National Congress coming out of that election, losing majority, needing to enter this government of national unity. But for other parties, quite a bit of growth. I mean, the MK party, for instance, one would argue that in 2025, their focus is really going to be on those very structures, something that we've heard the SG of the party, Floyd Shivambu, talk a lot about, their focus being.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one when it comes to MK. Remember, organizations are founded or there are key patrons that lead them, give them a lot of character, give a lot of feel and content to the organization. So in this instance, that's President Jacob Zuma, former President Jacob Zuma, and his family. My argument, and this is written in a longer piece in one of the national publications, my argument is that how far MK Party builds a rigorous organization or a vibrant organization is a function of what the Zumas are going to permit or not permit. So part of the organizational development work, for example, is transitioning from making decisions based on the will of the funder to having some participatory process, even if at a senior level. Okay, so top six or whatever the case may be. Now, that's where the first big test gets to be. The tension between the people morphing or waltzing into the roles that have been defined for them for the organization and having space to fulfill their roles and the obligations that come with that and the authorities that come with that. If you're Secretary General, the ability to confirm structures, set up structures, and all of those things. But that's always the tension that we are seeing simmering as the year begins is to what extent the Zumas are going to permit the organization's officials to do that. Or will they fire another salvo at the new recruits and fire them? So that's going to be a big tension this year for the MK party. If they're able to negotiate that well, then they may well have a sustainable organization. I read extracts of its constitution in terms of the powers of the president. Wow, they're thoroughgoing. It's almost like a dictatorship when the way they are defined in terms of the extent of the authority of the president, hiring and firing, among other things. So how that plays out in relation to the pressure to build a sustainable organization that can outlast the founder or its key patron, that's going to be MK's biggest issue to contend with.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and it certainly speaks to what the party will look like post 2025, you know, and in the years to come. But I want to move on because there are so many parties. I mean, I want to look at the Democratic Alliance, for instance. They are now part of national government, something that they've been wanting for a very long time. What do they do now to solidify their position in 2025 as they prepare themselves for 2026?
Yeah, so I think the big issue for the Democratic Alliance is going to be to what extent can they retain their identity as not a part of the ANC, while at the same time cooperative enough not to be seen to be derailing the GNU. So that's going to be a big issue. Two things are going to happen as a result of that, where that very political context is going to create a schism between the DA in government and the DA at party headquarters, as led by Helen Zille. Also, it's going to be interesting in terms of the dynamics within the party. Previously, the leader of the party had a significant degree of power because it was them who communicated the party's agenda in parliament. Now that they are part of a government, there is a structure of how government communicates with the legislative arm and therefore the rest of society. What we have seen is that that power has shifted to now Helen Zille, who represents the DA outside of government. So that, but I mean, and that communication now happens not as structured as it used to be within the context of parliamentary politics. It's happening outside of those structures in ways that make some people question to what extent the DA commits to being a part of the GNU, even though this is the ordinary, questions that a party that's not the majority party raises. So there's some limitations. What's going to be interesting is which leaders are going to be emerging leading to the next conference, and how the DA, in the tension between the DA in government and the DA in the parliamentary benches, as well as in party headquarters, is going to deliver a new politics for the party to be contended with. And but I think it is important to say this broadens the politics of the DA to not just be about, are there black leaders? Are black leaders leading, or are they being marginalized? It's now becoming much broader because there's a much bigger issue to contend with. And they will welcome it on one level, but on another, it does place some limitations on them, because even people who are pro the GNU judge them when they do what a partner should be doing, collaborating, but at the same time holding the other accountable.
Yeah, we could talk for a very long time, because I also want to get your views on, what a party like the EFF, for instance, needs to prioritize in 2025. They did have their conference towards the end of last year. Julius Malema firmly in that leadership position of the party, and what it is that they need to do to strengthen themselves in 2025. But as you bring that in, I'm also keen to talk about a party like the IFP. When we came out of the elections, many saying the IFP certainly is one of the biggest winners of that election, finding themselves in government and seeing quite a substantial amount of growth.
Yeah, so I think the EFF is going to have to think about who gets to be its messengers going forward. I mean, you had an almost de facto troika of Malema, Ndlozi, and Floyd. And I say de facto because Ndlozi was not really, from an organizational structure point of view, part of that inner core that was governing, but very important, having been a spokesperson. So he had that gravitas. Now that they've withered the storm, they have a choice to become the party that's going to have the less drama. But I think that the temptation to do purging, to purge people based on their positions before the last conference, may just turn what would have been a peaceful year for the EFF and a year of consolidation to becoming a very dramatic year. And to do that, those purges, at a time when you have an MK party that's waiting for mistakes internally in the EFF, so it can capitalize them, might just be the worst thing for Julius Malema and the new leadership to do. So mine would be for them to enjoy a calm year as they should, having just come from a conference. They need to think twice about and resist that strong temptation to want to purge people, because that would be elongating what should have ended at their NPA and bringing it to 2025.
Yeah, briefly, the IFP and what you think they can do to consolidate their position in 2025. Briefly, I'm out of time. Because also, let's not forget, we're also moving into a Trump year. So our political parties also starting to prepare themselves around the messaging that they need to have for 2025 on a global platform as well.
That's going to be interesting for the GNU. But quickly on the IFP, their biggest issue is how to rise up and face effectively a person who's got a statesman. So Zuma, for example, is a father figure, like it or not, like him or not. He's a father figure who started a party at a time when the IFP has lost its own father figure. The question is how strategically to contend with that so that it can retain whatever momentum it's had and continue to build. And that's going to be a function of political strategy that's well executed, because it's not an insurmountable issue. The odds are against them, having faced President Zuma in the way that he has lent his political credibility to MK party, but it's something that it's their biggest issue, how to contend with the MK party and win.
If we could talk for hours, we really could, because we have quite the colorful political landscape. But let's bank it for other times of the year. And I know that we'll be chatting again in the future. Dr. Ongama Mtimka, thank you so much for speaking to us.